Tennessee is, I believe, a high character basketball team that is not going to shy away from a big moment. They're mature. They're going to keep the game close because of their defense. But you asked the question, will the Sweet 16 and Kentucky, who they've lost 2-2 this season, be too big for Tennessee? I want to get your thoughts on why, and we do that right now. Today's tough question.
Today's tough question. Boom. You heard that. Now take it. The Dave Hooker Show with Caleb Calhoun.
And it's brought to you by Banks & Jones, Tennessee's trial attorney, banksandjones.com, from the Ted Russell Ford Lincoln Studios. Caleb, why do you think that Tennessee could shy away from this huge monstrous moment that some have argued, including ESPN writer Chris Lowe, is the most anticipated or biggest game in Tennessee?
And I've argued that too.
Yes, which you definitely could make that argument. Caleb, why do you have any sort of concern that this team would shy away? Because I don't.
I think there are times where, if you look through history, particularly in Tennessee basketball, the moment gets so overwhelming, you almost wilt. And here, let me explain what I mean by this. You would say, and you would think that because this team is senior laden, that they would be very mature and able to handle the moment, right?
Yes.
Because of how many seniors. I would argue when you're very loaded, when you're totally loaded with seniors, Dave, you sometimes actually melt down in front of the pressure. And here's why. You start to think, oh, this is my last shot. This is my last moment. If I lose it here, it's over. Whereas if you're a bunch of juniors, this is the funny thing. When you're a bunch of juniors playing as an underdog, you sometimes actually do better because there's just no pressure on you, because you feel like you're playing with house money, right? If you know you're all coming back the next year.
Right.
Quick example of this is the
2000, like in the Jerry Green era, they played with house money far too often.
Yes, it can go the other way. But just a quick example is 2007 Tennessee, Ohio State in basketball. They almost beat Ohio State when Ohio State went to the national title game that year with Mike Conley and Greg Oden. And Tennessee got a 20-point lead. They blew the lead. They lost by 1. But they played much better in that game than they did in the Sweet 16 the next year against Louisville. Why? Yes, Louisville was a bad matchup for them. But the other part of that is that I think Chris Lofton and Juwan Smith were kind of feeling like, oh, man, this is just our last chance to do anything special. And this Tennessee basketball team, look, Zakai Ziegler, Chaz Lanier, Jemai Meshack, particularly Ziegler and Meshack, who want to play and do this for Rick Barnes, you worry that they could start to think, man, this is our last chance. And then not only is it their last chance, but then you get to the fact that it's not for themselves. They see this as maybe Barnes' last real chance to make a run at a Final Four. And you wonder, can that combine with playing a team that swept them, playing them in the Sweet 16, what I think is the biggest game in history for Tennessee, can that make the moment too big? And you wonder with that. And just one other quick thing, Dave. You watched that. Remember the 97 game where Peyton Manning lost to Florida?
Yes, very well.
I know Peyton Manning was under a ton of pressure and there was no running game that day. It did feel like Peyton Manning knew it was his last chance to beat Florida, though, and put way too much on himself to try to win that game, didn't he?
Yes. No, there's no question about it. All right. So Chad says, nah, Caleb is wrong. This team is different, and Chaz is not the same Chaz we had in the regular season. In my opinion, I'll give you my thoughts on that. Today's tough question brought to you by Banks & Jones, Tennessee's trial attorney, banksandjones.com. Why Banks & Jones? Well, it's because they're Tennessee's trial attorney. You can play to win with Banks & Jones because they'll go to trial. You've heard of other lawyers. They say they'll go to trial and fight for you. They won't. They just want to settle. That's the easiest way out. Well, that's not Banks & Jones, led by T. Scott Jones. They won't settle. They'll go to trial for you. Tennessee's trial attorney. They play to win. Truly, Tennessee's trial attorney when it comes to criminal defense or personal injury. Why settle? It's Banks & Jones. T. Scott Jones. Banks & Jones. All right, so here's why I have no concern in that regard. Senior laden plays defense. Those are not the type of teams that can just go cold. You remember Auburn's Final Four run when they hit every three they took in March until they got to the Final Four? That team, I thought, had to have a lot of good fortune to make it to win a championship because they were relying on their outside shooting. that usually doesn't last for 3 weeks. Sometimes it can. It's happened before, but usually doesn't last. Caleb, I don't think this team's makeup allows it to get shocked, surprised, scared, whatever the word you might want to use. I do think there's something to be said for the fact that they're playing for Rick Barnes, and I think that's significant. And we heard Jemai Mashak talk about that. Could that add pressure in the final moments? Well, you're talking to somebody who has them losing to Houston in the final moments by a couple of possessions. I do find it very interesting that the periphery seems to be, and if you can look up the spread on the game, do you know the spread off the top of your head?
It was initially Tennessee 4.5.
Okay, so Tennessee, according to one ESPN metric, has a 39.6% of doing what you said, which is wilting and losing. That Kentucky only has a 39% chance of beating Tennessee. Does that number surprise you?
No, that makes sense. I'll tell you the number that surprises me is the over-under set at 144.5, which suggests that Tennessee's going to score. If Tennessee were to cover the spread, if I'm just doing the math in my head real quick, I believe Tennessee would score 74 points and Kentucky would score 70, or Tennessee would score 75 and Kentucky would score 70. So Tennessee would either win the game 74-70 or 75-70. That kind of shocks me because Kentucky's defense is not that good. They score a lot at will. I thought somebody would set the over-under either really low. If you thought Tennessee was going to control the pace of this game, you thought the game would be in the 60s. If you think Kentucky's going to control the pace of the game's going to be in the 80s. And right. So the
80s would be 160. So they're kind of in between, right?
They're in between. Yeah, that's what's I think it's throwing me off. I thought if you were going to favor Tennessee by 4.5, you would have the over-under set in the 130s, low 130s.
Here's my thing with Kentucky. I've been around a lot of teams that got a lot of feel goods. If you look at Tennessee and their draw back when they were making runs at the Sweet 16 previously, they had Southwest Missouri State one year. They had Delaware. The next year they had Charlotte. They had a favorable draw. I thought even earlier in the 2001 season, Caleb, when they lost to North Carolina. So there are a lot of feel goods going on now. And remember that Mark Pope gets his team there after a lot of people thought that they just not that good. But Mark Pope is horrible in the tournament as well. Let's not forget that. So I feel like the feel goods, they're getting a lot of those, Caleb. But at the end of the day, the meat of the meal is that Tennessee is widely expected to win by a couple of possessions and even metrics straight up. So I feel like Kentucky is more likely to get blindsided and wilt in the moment than actually Tennessee.
That's possible. And look, it could be possible too that, and this happens, Kentucky swept Tennessee. Do you think that they're so inexperienced they could feel themselves a little too much, thinking that they are much better than they are against this team?
Absolutely. No, I do believe that totally. And I believe that is realistic. Let's not forget. Let's look at Mark Pope's track record. I mean, he could soon be
highly mediocre.
Yeah. I mean, he could soon be. We'll come up with a funny alliteration while you come up with the poll question concerning Tennessee's maturity and if you're worried about them wilting at all. But you've got BYU when he was there. Of course, they didn't have a postseason in 2020. Then he went to the round of 64 and then the NIT quarterfinals. Then he goes to BYU. He makes the round of 64 and he's out. Mark Pope hasn't done nothing whatsoever in any sort of tournament that matters. He made the semifinals for the CBI, but that's a big who cares.
Until this year, though. Until this year. He's in the Sweet 16 now, so we have to be fair to him on that.
No, I just don't have any faith that he goes much deeper. I'm actually kind of a little bit surprised he got this far.
Yeah, I think, things I had learned about Mark Pope, and I made fun of the hire because of the things I had read and what I saw in the NCAA tournament in his past. From what I've learned, based on what he was allowed to recruit and do at BYU, he had a lot more simplified of a scheme than he does at Kentucky because he just couldn't do the type of thing. Like one of the things he just couldn't do like things like inbound plays and draw up things like that he wanted to do when he was at BYU. So he's actually opened up what he does at Kentucky much more than he did at BYU. And that includes the offense and the 3-point shooting. So I think that is the difference. the question with Kentucky will be like, are they? Here's where the moment can get scary for Tennessee, and this is the truth though. Look, Kentucky's a really, really, really good 3-point shooting team. I mean, they are 30th in the top 30 in 3-point percentage, top 40 in 3-pointers made. If they shoot the ball well, say they come out shooting extremely well, if you're Tennessee, does Tennessee panic then and say, oh man, they're shooting really well? Or do they say, they're not going to continue shooting like this?
I don't think so. If Kentucky shoots really well, then they're going to win. I mean, that's tournament basketball. And you pointed out before, it shouldn't probably be a single elimination tournament, but we don't have that much time in our lives to have it best of 3 or best of 5 or best of 7. Unsung says Kentucky probably thinks because they swept us, in their mind, they've already won this game. That's a dangerous mindset. I agree. I think Kentucky is much more likely to wilt than Tennessee is. I just don't see that happening at all.
Yeah, see, there's one big difference, though. There's one big problem. Kentucky would feel that way, but then Vegas decided to get in the way and tell them that they're 4.5-point underdogs. I think by being underdogs, they're not going to, they are going to take the game seriously now, and they're going to be personally motivated, and they probably are upset about this. I mean, Dave, I'm just going to, the 2001 Tennessee-Florida game in football. How much did Tennessee being 18-point underdogs have a factor in them winning that game?
It was a huge factor. And I think that is a factor from time to time. But I don't think Florida, I guess they could say to themselves, listen, I think we break down the psychological aspect of sports far too often in football. I think that for the most part, you're able to go out there and hit somebody and the emotions aren't really a part of it. And once you get into the game, you're good. I do think it affects you during the week to practice at a higher level. Basketball's different. If anything like that does creep into their mind of, oh, the pressure is on because Rick Barnes might retire and I'm a senior, that can affect your shot. And that can have an effect. I just think it's more likely to have an effect with Kentucky. I believe they believe they're just going to walk over Tennessee. I don't believe that's going to be the case.
I hope they're not stupid enough to believe that.
I don't know, man. I've been around a lot of kids play basketball. I call them kids. I know they're young men. Well, they are in Tennessee's case. They're almost more kids in Kentucky's case. It's a younger basketball team. It's 3 full days of hearing how great you are. Actually 4 if you count Sunday. I don't know if they still go to class or anymore or not, but they're somewhere in public, right? I mean, they're hearing from somebody. There's Kentucky fans everywhere. So they just come out of the coal mine left and right.